Hello, bird nerds. Oh, kia ora. G'day. I'm Grant Williams. It's the Bird Emergency. This is the show where I get to speak with people who are involved in bird conservation, bird projects, bird research, bird watching, bird photography. But today it's bird protection, bird conservation, and the wonderful story about how a bird that looked like it was going to disappear has somehow managed to cling to existence. I'm joined by Alasdair Burns, who is sitting on, I think I've got it identified right, that he's on Stewart Island, but let's find out. Stewart Island in New Zealand, or Aotearoa. Alasdair, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Aotearoa, good morning. Yep, so I'm sitting here on Stewart Island, New Zealand's third island.
Tell us how big Stewart Island, or how small Stewart Island is, and how many people live there. Let's start with that.
Yeah, Stewart Island it's about the size of Singapore. It's about 1,700 square kilometres, but it's got 400 people as opposed to about 5 million. It's mostly forested. There's one town on the island where everyone lives, and about 85% of it is national park, Rakiura National Park.
And when you say forested, Alasdair, is it natural forest, or has it been managed? Is it regrowth, replanted? Give us a sense of perhaps the colonial history of Stewart Island. Has it been exploited and then reclaimed, or is it genuinely still a wild place?
Yeah, so it's generally still a wild place. So there's never been any sort of agriculture or plantation forestry here. So initially, the first European settlers to come here were sealers and whalers, and were very transient. And then later on, people started settling here for fishing. And there was a big period at the beginning of the 20th century when there was a lot of felling of the largest trees, these big rimu trees. And eventually that gave way to, so the modern economy of the town is mainly tourism and fishing. But the forest has been selectively felled. So those big 500 or 600-year-old trees close to the town have all been taken for timber. But the majority of the island, the forest is completely untouched, except for introduced pests. So we've got rats, feral cats, bush-tailed possums, and 2 species of deer on the island.
And the reason we're speaking is because Stewart Island is one of the remaining locations where the New Zealand Dotterel is hanging on. And let's be really precise, the Southern New Zealand Dotterel. And my understanding is, Alasdair, that it's the southern subspecies. It's not a distinct species. There is a northern subspecies, but their situation is not so dire. They're like 10 times more numerous. Is that correct?
Yeah, that absolutely. So the New Zealand Dotterel is a charismatic little wader. People in the North Island will often see them on beaches where they nest. So the northern subspecies nests on beaches, I should say. People will often find them defending their nests. Both subspecies have this broken wing display that they will do if you get too close to their nest. They'll start making a lot of noise. They'll run away from their nest, and they'll drag one of their wings along the ground to pretend that they're injured. That's an adaptation for predators. It makes them look like an easier target than the nest that they're protecting. Once they've led them far enough away that they can't remember where the nest was, they go jokes and they fly away. So both subspecies do that. The northern subspecies is well known. There's about 5,000 of those now, and they're recovering well. The southern subspecies is less well known even within New Zealand. It's restricted to Stewart Island. It used to be found throughout the South Island, which is a pattern you find in a lot of New Zealand birds. There'll be a North Island version and a South Island version. So Kakapo is one of those. There's a South Island saddleback. And so I think of these as a South Island dotterel. But unfortunately, because of stoats, introduced predators in the South Island, the last recorded breeding on the South Island is really like in the late 19th century. They used to be found in such numbers that early explorers didn't even comment on them. It wasn't remarkable to find lots of nests in the Southern Alps, but since at least the early 20th century, they've been restricted to Stewart Island where there are no stoats. And so this is a relict population, and hopefully one day we'll be able to find them up and down the Southern Alps again. The southern subspecies is distinct in a number of ways from the northern. They're slightly larger, they're a bit bulkier, and the main one is that they don't nest on beaches, but instead they nest on mountaintops. If you talk to people in the rest of the world about dotterel, particularly people from Europe, they're like, oh, well, that's where dotterels breed. European dotterel you'll just find it right on the tops of mountains in Northern Europe. But here in New Zealand, dotterel, people associate them with beaches because that's where they're found in the North Island. But yeah, these guys, they spend their summers on the mountaintops and their winters on the beaches, and that's different to the northern subspecies.
They look quite similar to my eyes to our red-capped dotterel or red-capped plover, and I think that occurs also in New Zealand, but also reminiscent when I look at it. It reminds me a lot about what the Australian dotterel or the inland dotterel that we call it here, which lives in dry country and even in what we call the gibber, the stony deserts of inland Australia. So dotterels in general are a highly adaptable species. With that, the kind of mountainous, grassy slopes that were predominant in the Southern Island, would they have shared habitat with a bird like the takahe prior to the introduction of all the pests, or are they even more specialised than those subalpine and grasslands that takahe was living in?
Yeah, so takahe, I think, are specialised, the ones, this not my area of expertise, but I think they're specialised for feeding on tussock. Tussock grass is a bit too long for dotterel, so what they prefer is the very high alpine meadows with vegetation no more than 4 or 5 centimetres high. I think that's where we find them nesting on Stewart Island, and that's all the knowledge of their breeding that we have. So I suspect it would be on the South Island, they would be up above the tree line, nesting in the very shortest vegetation, like in that photo that you can see there. So I think that's, for them, they probably feel a lot safer in that than tall tussock that you would find a takahe in.
Is there a much seasonal movement on Stewart Island, in like altitudinally, where at this time of year, which is our winter in the Southern Hemisphere, where on Stewart Island, in which habitat would you be finding the dotterel when you go out later today, Alasdair?
So if I was going out today to look for dotterel, I would go to it depends on the tides really. So they have a couple of roosting spots on Stewart Island at sea level. And this is where they spend their winter. So they spend their summers on the mountaintops and their winters at sea level. And so at low tide on Stewart Island, about 60 to 70 birds flock at the freshwater flats, which is an estuary in the middle of the island. And there they're feeding on mud flats and shell banks, which are uncovered at low tide and covered at high tide. And they're looking for small crabs, invertebrates, and even small flounder, like tiny fish. What happens is they'll arrive there at low tide and they'll feed and gradually get pushed towards the coast by the tide as the tide comes in. And once it gets to a certain point, they all fly en masse in one big flock, and they fly across to about 15 kilometers across to the other side of the island, where there's a big series of sand dunes called Mason Bay, and they will roost at Mason Bay during high tide. And you'll commonly find them there in the sand amongst the rocks and the small grasses, just with head under their wing, just on one leg, resting. And that's where that's the most accessible place. So if it's high tide and you're at Mason Bay, you can find them in what we call the stone fields in between the dunes. And then I don't know what it is that triggers it. It might be time, but somehow they know that it's low tide again and it's time to go and fly back across 15 kilometers to this series of mud flats. And then they'll spend their time feeding there until it's time to flee from the tide.
I'm imagining, Alasdair, that in the summertime, that the beaches of Stewart Island, and indeed if the population manages to re-establish over time in the greater Southern Island, that summertime you have an influx of wader shorebird migrants coming from the Northern Hemisphere. So the dotterel has adapted to exploit a resource that is available to it almost exclusively in this winter period, and then it vacates what would be a highly contested food resource real estate, for want of a more scientific term, and they go and exploit a different habitat. Is there validity to my assumption?
Yeah, during the winter, we do get quite a lot of godwit still, for example, godwit in their wintering sites during the winter as well, overwintering here. It's quite inaccessible, the place where they feed on Stewart Island at freshwater is quite inaccessible. And so we only ever visited there really when we were counting the dotterel, or we do an annual census of the dotterel population. So That was usually the only time we'd go. So I don't actually know what the species makeup would be at freshwater at that estuary during the summer, because I haven't been there personally. They also spend the winter, so I should say the southern New Zealand dotterel, they flock in several places. The two biggest flocks are the one that I described that spends time at the freshwater mudflats and then roosts at Mason Bay on Stewart Island. But the next largest flock, which is around 40 or 50 birds, spend their winter on the other side of the strait on the South Island at a place called Aotearoa Bay. And that's a popular spot for bird watching. It's close to Invercargill and Bluff and other population centres like that. And there's a really awesome team of Birds New Zealand photographers and bird watchers who go over there and will count them. We got a lot of information from people's eBird checklists, actually, from Aotearoa Bay. But there's Aotearoa Bay is a major wader overwintering site. And I'm not sure how busy it is in the summer. I think a lot of these, the godwits are the main one, they occur in large numbers. But there's also resident birds like oyster catchers and swans, which would be there year round and flock in the winter. I always wondered whether the Southern Dotterel's adaptation to breeding on mountaintops was because of this geography of the South Island. On the North Island, there are lots and lots of sandy beaches, and it's a coastal kind of type that isn't as common in the South Island. What the South Island does have is lots of mountains. So I thought possibly it was just they were adapting to a nesting area, the subalpine zone, which is far more expansive in the South Island than it is in the North Island.
It's still a real estate problem, isn't it, for them? If there's not many beaches, if it's all sort of rocky, or if it's cliffs and drop-offs where they can't find a good suitable space to get a nest depression, a nest shallow, or a scrape. Well, what do we call a dotterel nest?
We call it pretty basic to start with. If you're a northern New Zealand dotterel, it's just a depression in the sand which might have a few sticks around it. Southern New Zealand dotterel are quite minimalist, so the photo you've got there is pretty typical of their environment. And if there was a nest in that photo, you wouldn't see it. It would still be, it's basically just a little bowl made from cut bits of that grass there that you can see, which is called snowgrass. A small sort of nest bowl of snowgrass, and then that's pretty much it's just enough to keep their 2 or 3 eggs just off the ground. And the males and females incubate those eggs 24/7, basically. The females during the day, and then they'll swap over, and the males will take the incubation during the night. And that's how they keep it warm rather than having a very well insulated nest.
Okay, let's talk about your role on Stewart Island and what the protective operations are that are going on in Stewart Island. While the focus of our discussion is the New Zealand dotterel, that Stewart Island is a sort of a stronghold for other birds, probably plant species too, I would imagine, in New Zealand. So give us an overview of what the threats to native birds are on Stewart Island and what the role you play in protecting them is.
Yeah, so for three years up until this April, I was working as part of the DOC team here on Stewart Island. So that's...
Might just say that's Department of Conservation for non-New Zealanders.
That's right, sorry, the Department of Conservation. So there's been a project to protect these dotterels pretty much in some form ever since the early 90s. So these dotterel were known about in the kind of 50s and 60s. But really in the 70s and 80s, they gained more interest. I think previously people had assumed that they were the same as the northern subspecies. But what happened was their numbers in the 50s and 60s were several hundred birds on and around Stewart Island. And then in the 80s, they were observed to the population really plummet. And by 1992, I think they numbered only 62 birds. And those 62 birds had a gender bias towards females of 4-1. So effectively, they estimated the breeding population was only around 12 pairs at that point because there was only around 10 or 12 males left in the population. Now, the reason for that gender bias is their main predator here on Stewart Island is feral cats, and feral cats are most active at night. They can be active during the day, but most of their hunting takes place at night. And so the main way that feral cats will catch these birds is in their breeding grounds while they're on the nest. And what happens is because these birds, they separate the incubation duties based on day and night. So females during the day and then males during the night. What happens is there's a bias in predation of male Southern New Zealand dotterel. And what happens, that's the main pressure on these birds is adult males and females being taken on the nest by feral cats. Feral cats are one of a number of pests that we've got here. I mentioned before we don't have stoats, but we do have rats, cats, and possums here on the island. All of those are a nuisance to dotterels to some extent, but feral cats are really the predator. And so they contributed to this gender bias, which is one challenge the population has. And really in the early 90s, this was recognized, and they initiated a program of feral cat control, which continues to this day. And that took the form of toxic baits for feral cats for about, basically from the early 90s until the present day. Now, that had huge success in getting that population of 62 all the way up to 290 by 2010. But since then, they've had a further decline down to this year's count was around 144 birds. So they're still not out of the woods. They're in a better situation than they were, but feral cats are a very difficult pest species to target, especially in the remote areas where these guys breed. And they're going to require ongoing conservation effort, and probably until the island is predator-free. And there is a predator-free Stewart Island project, which is ongoing at the moment and just in its early stages.
Is the predator-free Stewart Island project being adequately resourced? And I'm not asking that in a way to invite criticism, but there's always competition for resources, and compromises are always made. As you've pointed out, cats are a terrible problem to eradicate because they're smart, they're stealthy. And I know New Zealand have got the Predator Free New Zealand initiative being given extra impetus recently, which maybe we won't talk about the details of that. I'll get Predator Free New Zealand on to sort of stake that out. But from where you are on the ground in Stewart Island, do you think you've got enough resources to make a difference rather than just hold steady? The research I did had the number still at about 200 and whatnot, but there wasn't a focus on only 12 males left in the southern population. So I'm wondering if the easy information that I found has made its way into the New Zealand public, and is there enough pressure about protecting this species compared to some of the other icon species? And New Zealand's got a lot of those, a lot of really unique and, shall we say, cute kind of birds. So, rambling question. Do you reckon you've got enough money to do the job? So
the 12 birds was back in the early 90s. So that was the sort of biggest bottleneck in the population, and they've increased since then. And we don't know if that gender bias still exists. But the population estimates, you do see quite a few different estimates, and people variously get them from different sort of press releases. And that's something probably I need to spend some time tidying up. If I have a bit of spare time, I've been meaning to edit the Wikipedia article for these birds for some years now.
Get all the facts. Let's get all the facts on record now, Alasdair. And that'll be out there in the ether, and the transcript can be out there. Straight away. So I was saying that there was about 2,000 birds in the northern subspecies population at around 2014, 2015, and around 200 in the same count period in the southern population. And that's obviously stemming from that low base of, 62 birds, and made it up to 200. So I was thinking, it's bouncing back. But if it's only holding steady, to me, that is not a success story. That's just status quo. And that's the point of the question, because it's such a difficult challenge, isn't it? Where you're on a remote location. The birds nick off to an alpine site in the summertime, which is hard to get to. One of their wintertime roosts that you were describing is, I think you used the word, inaccessible. Yeah. So it's very difficult for people to actually get in and do any interventions. I just wonder whether you, as someone who's working on the project and devoting so much time and energy to a bird that is probably unknown, and that we'll talk about that in a minute, but cats are such a massive problem, and you've got rats as well. And then you've got our gift to New Zealand, the possum. Could there ever be enough money to? That's really the question.
Yeah. So I guess the site where they breed, part of the difficulty in trying to protect them is they breed on these mountaintops. They're quite inaccessible. Stewart Island's hilltops are quite rugged. There are no tracks or roads or anything that get you close to their breeding areas. And most of the conservation work, so the rangers, the team I worked on, the guys in the field would be going out there for 7 or 8 days at a time, helicoptering in and out to alpine huts and working out of there and doing their feral cat control. So it's quite a tough job. Obviously, because of its remoteness, you need the budget for it. You can't just wander down the street and go out and protect the nest. Part of the reason why the northern subspecies is doing better is because some of their threats are not so much the predators, but actually people, in dogs, for example, and cars on their beaches when they're nesting. So they've had great success with volunteer nest protectors. So these are volunteers from the community, often bird watchers, who will stake out areas where northern New Zealand dotterels are nesting and educate the public about their presence. And they've had a lot of success with that, I think. And the northern population, I think, is, you're right, several thousand individuals. I'm not sure what the exact current count is. But the southern New Zealand dotterel population, the last 5 years of counts, I think, were 167, 173. And then last year, a decline to 155, and another decline this year to 144. So they're between 100 and 200 individuals, and they're not showing great signs of recovery. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Is there any work running alongside the on-site predator eradication works to try and establish a captive insurance population, or in some way to preserve the genetics? Imagine if, for instance, there was a series of fires over a decade, that alone, apart from predators, could impact. I'm guessing that global warming may have some kind of impact on the feeding grounds. So the threats could be combining and pushing towards a 30, 40, 50 years down the track where the main pressure might not be predators. So is there some other strategy to preserve at least some genetic material that outside of the wild?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few things there. You're right, they're coastal. They winter on the coast, so rising sea levels could impact their coastal areas where they feed during the winter. They also feed along the high tide line on beaches, so that might be just could have some kind of behavioral flexibility there. They nest in areas which are reasonably vegetation free, but with changing climate, they may find those areas, they're currently above what we call the scrub line here. There's trees on Stewart Island up to a certain point, and then beyond that, there's a layer of subalpine scrub before it goes into these open tops, like the grassland that you can see in that photo. If that scrub layer was to encroach upon those alpine meadows, that might reduce their breeding areas. So that's a long way down the line. Currently, the main thing is trying to control as many feral cats as possible around their breeding areas so that we're reducing that predation. Because they can raise 2 or 3 chicks each pair, and pairs can re-nest during a season. It's very rare, but we have recorded them doing that. So they do have the potential to increase their numbers. There's not so much, say, Kakapo, where they will only breed under certain conditions and only have 1 or 2 chicks per breeding season. These guys will breed every year, and as long as the breeding adults are retained in the population, they do have a lot of potential for recovery. In terms of conserving them, so there's the ongoing cost of feral cat control, and that's funded by the New Zealand government. The longer term, the predator-free Rakiura, Stewart Island Rakiura is the name of the island. So predator-free Rakiura currently have been funded, I think it's about $4 million over 4 years to do that feasibility study for the island eradication. And that's an eradication of possums, rats, cats, and hedgehogs from Stewart Island. There's a small population, we think, of hedgehogs around the township. And that'll have a much higher price tag. But in terms of protecting the dotterels, at least, that would be the long-term goal, because at the moment, all you can achieve is really suppressing or intercepting feral cats before they get to the dotterel. But the long-term security of the species would involve feral cats being removed from the island completely.
Yeah, it's how about funding for people? And by that, often a lot of programs have a lot of resources aimed at, for instance, eradicating the pest or maybe rehabilitating a landscape. But you need people to monitor and assess the success or otherwise of the. Are there enough people available to work on the project in a research or even you mentioned before you've got the job of getting the information out there and monitoring and updating the Wikipedia and whatnot and perhaps disseminating information to people like myself. Often those roles get neglected in any kind of funding round because money's always hard to get. How robust is the team? And I use that term loosely because I imagine there's many more people than yourself who are committed to this endeavour, Alasdair, but do a lot of you have to shoehorn it into other roles? And do you see where I'm going with this? Is that often there's a whole lot of volunteer hours that are required if work is to get done. Are you in a situation like that for the whole recovery and monitoring effort?
Yeah, I think for a number of the I'm not on the team anymore, but definitely having worked with them, it's definitely a passion project for quite a few people. They've currently just started hiring for permanent staff on the project, which is actually a nice improvement. We were working during the summers for 6 months, 6 months on, 6 months off. And so now they're going to have year-round dotterel ranges, which is really good. So that's going to allow them to do a lot more work, particularly targeting cats perhaps over the winter, and probably doing a lot more of what you talk about, communication, advocacy, and also doing monitoring during the winter of the dotterel's winter feeding numbers, how they move around, and whether so we know that 40 or 50 of these birds are flying to Aotearoa wetlands and Aotearoa estuary on the South Island where there are stoats. And we don't know if stoats are impacting them on their feeding grounds. We don't think so. And we don't see any sort of decline in numbers from the beginning of the winter to the end. We're pretty confident the main threat is the predation on the nest, ground nesting birds. But they will be able to go and do things like that as well. But increasing feral cat control will definitely benefit these birds, and hopefully we'll see a sustained increase in their numbers back up to closer to 300.
Wouldn't it be nice if 300 became 3,000 and then became 30,000?
Yeah, absolutely. Like my sort of fantasy is we've currently got one population on one island. So really for a species like this, one of the goals of conservation is often having a second breeding population. So once Stewart Island is predator free, there's people working on, like you say, predator free New Zealand, and that's gathering momentum. Having areas in the Southern Alps where they could breed on the South Island and reintroducing them from Stewart Island to the South Island would be amazing, and it would really secure their future because you'd have an insurance pocket. The other thing you mentioned was captive breeding. So that's not been worked out for dotterels. The only time the dotterels have been kept in captivity was northern dotterels, and it was during an oil spill from an oil tanker. So these were oiled birds, and they were kept in captivity. This was up in the Bay of Plenty in the north of the North Island. But apart from that, there's no knowledge of how to keep these birds in captivity and even have them breed in captivity. So that stuff all takes a long time to work out.
Right. And it's always the least best.
Yeah, exactly.
Positions. By raising it and not promoting it, let's everyone be clear about that. My concern for a bird that nests in such a limited habitat is that what we've seen in Australia is places, and they're seeing it in the Northern Hemisphere now, that places that don't normally burn are now burning. And once you have a fire regime into an area that isn't adapted to fire, that generally leads to a change in the vegetation type. And if there's a fire that comes again, perhaps in a 5 or 10 year period, that can radically alter the vegetation type, which may have a really serious impact in the nesting opportunities. Obviously, I can't support that with evidence in the New Zealand context, but that's the kind of thing that concerns me for a bird like this, and that there may be no thought about fire because it hasn't happened yet. But you only need one, and then once the vegetation type changes, then lightning strikes that have never been a problem before, then they become a problem. And that's my concern about such a limited genetic diversity for this population and them being so specialised.
Yeah. So, we mentioned sort of climate change earlier, and obviously that's something that we've got to think about in the long-term future because these birds nest close to vegetation. There is a possible that this scrub sometime in the future might get dry enough to sustain bushfires. Currently, we're lucky that Stewart Island's pretty mild and pretty wet. We joke with people that we're a tropical South Pacific island, but we do get a bit of rainfall, and that keeps the forest here. It's a temperate rainforest. It's typically the bushfires that we do get on Stewart Island tend to be in Manuka, because it's quite a dry plant and it has a lot of resin in its leaves. So often you'll find these scrub fires in wetlands. And there was actually recently in April a large by New Zealand standards scrub fire in the wetlands close to where these birds overwinter on the south coast of the South Island in a place called Aotearoa wetlands. I think that fire, it was quite large, but compared to some of the fires in Australia, not very large at all. But it was 1,300 hectares, and it was close to the areas where these birds feed. And actually, the birds were there at the time. Fortunately, the wind was in the opposite direction, but that's could be something which is more of a threat for these birds in the future, especially where they breed.
I think I'm just checking it, but I think the Manuka, as we understand it, Manuka is Leptospermum, and I believe it's Leptospermum scope. I think just checking to make sure when I'm checking, it's of course telling me it's Manuka honey. But we share that plant. Here it is, Leptospermum scoparium, which is the prickly tea tree. We call it here in Australia the 5-petaled tea tree flower, similar to the reminiscent of the coastal tea tree for listeners in Australia. But volatile oils in the leaves, so that at certain temperatures, if you get a hot enough fire, they explode in a similar way to the eucalyptus can do.
That's right.
So there's the climate change can lead to, you only need a small variation in the summertime temperatures to lead to different fire risks. So I'm not an expert in all of that stuff, but this is my concern for such a limited population, and that New Zealand's got all these different habitats all jammed in so close to each other because you've got those altitudinal changes that happen on the South Island over smaller geographical distances. So, yeah, it's a big concern. The thing that I'm interested in with this bird, it seems like it's obviously endangered is, I'm sure, what it's listed as, but it's catastrophically endangered. It's far more than so many of the other birds or any of the other animals that share that classification. So I've been leading up to this question. How aware are New Zealanders generally of, one, the existence of this bird, and two, the plight of the bird?
Yeah, good. I'm biased, but I do consider it to be possibly New Zealand's most threatened bird. There are other birds which maybe there are smaller numbers and pure numbers, things like the fairy tern, but in terms of their distinctness and their sort of stability, because they're so threatened in their breeding, I'd say that they're right up there as possibly, the bird in New Zealand that's most at risk. And you're right, I think most New Zealanders don't know about it. If you say dotterel, they will think of the northern dotterel, which is actually a bit of a good news story at the moment because their numbers have increased by quite a lot. Their population may have doubled or tripled over the last 20 or 30 years with active conservation. But these guys, people forget about them. That doesn't help that they're not recognized as a full species. Some authorities do recognize them as a species, some don't. And I think that's the classic sort of taxonomic argument of, was it lumpers or splitters?
Yeah, can we explore that for just a moment? Which body afford the southern population species status?
I believe the IUCN list them as different species, but I think that's more a reflection of their rarity and giving them the exposure, making sure that they're not just lumped in with the northern New Zealand dotterels that are doing relatively well. I can't remember off the top of my head, the other authorities, but they are just right on the border. The
New Zealand Museum doesn't split them, does it?
Possibly. The New Zealand Threat Classification System, though, does. So they're right on the edge of the behaviourally and morphologically distinct.
Okay.
from the northern population, but some people would say that's not enough to make them more than a subspecies. The two diverged about 10,000 years ago, and it's possible because they do migrate. They're capable of flying long distances, that there was enough gene flow between the North and the South Islands that for them to stay genetically close. Things like there was a North Island and a South Island takahe, for example, and that's obviously more understandable. As soon as the Cook Strait opened between the North and South Islands, those takahe aren't going to interact with each other, especially once the takahe had evolved to be flightless. So there was a study back in 2013 as the most recent sort of genetic study of the two populations, and they found they considered them to have enough genetic difference to be recognized as different species. But yes, so still they're a small population way down here in the south of the country, and they do get forgotten about a lot. In terms of they don't have an insurance population somewhere else, there's no captive population, and their population still is fluctuating or declining, and they're still quite vulnerable to predators. So there's a lot of stuff which is threatening them and making their situation quite precarious. And like you said, things like stochastic events like bushfires can affect small populations. I had a lecturer she was explaining how all populations have stochastic effects and fluctuations. But if you have a small population, the chances of it fluctuating to zero are much greater than obviously if you have a much larger one. So these guys, something stochastic, like you say, a bushfire, a small flock of them flying through smoke, and even if that was only affecting 10 birds in a much larger population, that might not matter in the long term. But for these guys, 10 birds is nearly 10% of their population.
I see threats everywhere when we talk this way, and have a look at what avian influenza is doing to seabird populations in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that avian influenza is a threat, but we don't know what could come around the corner, what the winds of change that are happening in our environment all around us might pop up next. So there could be an avian disease that affects shorebirds rather than seabirds. It might come out of captive populations of other birds. Now, when you've only got 200 in a total population, you lose 10 birds. That's a catastrophic event, right? And these birds are seasonally migrating, and they're sharing feeding habitat with birds that migrate from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. So the idea that they're insulated by their remoteness is true in one sense, but it's absolutely not true in another sense. So global risks are a risk, and just because they're not a risk today, we've got to be cognizant that the risk is still present. So it's dire. So I'm now on Team Split, right? So I'm on Team Split for the reason that it seems that you haven't got a sporting team named. Have they got a Maori name? The southern population?
Yep. So all dotterels in New Zealand are referred as turifatu. So we refer to these. They don't have a specific southern New Zealand dotterel.
So we need to get a specific southern dotterel name so that we can start talking about them as a unique identity. And we've got to get into identity politics here, Alasdair.
Yeah.
Then we need a sporting team to adopt them.
Yeah. Well, currently the closest to that, unfortunately, southern New Zealand dotterel is not quite as catchy as a galah or something like that. You can imagine the Melbourne galahs, but the Melbourne southern New Zealand dotterels doesn't quite roll off the tongue quite as nicely.
One thing about the Invercargill something or others.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need the provincial cricket team to adopt them or something like that.
Yeah, the local Southland provincial rugby team is the Southland Stags, so maybe we can sway them.
But isn't that part of the problem? Look, we're getting a little bit off dotterels here, but this is part of the cultural problem. Stags are a feral pest species in New Zealand, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So they should not be an emblematic species that one of the cultural powerhouses in the local area and a significant economic force in the local area should be distancing themselves from it rather than idolising or lionising them. look, I'm no expert and we're probably not the people to be talking about. We aren't the people to be talking about this, but I wonder whether there would be a variant of the general Maori terminology for dotterel that could be applied to it and then used, if it was culturally appropriate, because I've got no idea, to then make the local... Is there a provincial netball team or based out of Invercargill?
Yeah, I believe the local netball team is the Southern Steel.
All right. They should be the Dotterels.
The Southern Dotterels.
Yeah.
I mean, it already works. The Southern Dotterels.
It does. It works. So
maybe you just hit on that might be a real light bulb moment.
But that's the way I think about the problem, because if you've got the government putting really significant resources into predator-free New Zealand, it seems crazy that the major sporting team in the area is running around promoting a feral species that are there stags in up in the alpine habitat that are potentially treading down dotterel nests.
Yeah, so the two species.
There we go. Public enemy number one.
They don't actively search for dotterels. We don't think they may do.
Oh no, of course not. It'd be accidental.
But we do know, because we've got it on camera, that if they do encounter a nest while they're grazing, they do eat the eggs.
So there we go. What do you call the Invercargill stags or whatever you call? Stop it. That's just, I know they probably they won't even know that's what they're doing. But I'm pointing it out to them, and I'm going to write to their bloody marketing people tomorrow. I'm going to tell them that it's wholly inappropriate if they are supporters of their region.
Are completely confined to Southland, so you could say they're Southland endemic, so they're probably stags are found throughout the country.
So pull your head in. You buffheads, rugby buffheads, pull your head in. And for the netball, the Southern Steel, I think the Southern Dotterels is a much better name. Let's get on it, Alasdair. Let's prompt a revolution.
I hadn't even thought of that before. Yeah, but another thing that's going on at the moment is we do have New Zealand's Bird of the Year competition just getting going. And there are some keen Southland-based dotterel enthusiasts who are running the Southern New Zealand Dotterel, or the New Zealand Dotterel campaign. Okay, if people can vote for that, it would be great to see the dotterel get some coverage there.
Put me in touch. Give me all their socials. I'm on this. Excellent. Am on this. Let's go. See, this is the kind of stuff that may shift the needle just a little bit. Again, I don't know who your major industries are in the Southland, who the major corporate entities are, but they're the people who need to be made aware of this. This is an opportunity for them to do something positive.
Yeah, definitely. And there are companies that do sponsor some kind of New Zealand birds. So Meridian, who are a power company, have had a long-term, I think Genesis, have had a long-term commitment to FIO, or blue duck. That makes sense that they're a hydro generating company, and blue duck nest and breed on rivers. Meridian currently help with the Kakapo recovery project, and the Takahe, I think, currently there's a infrastructure construction company called Fulton Hogan who have been helping with them as well, I think. So there is room for a company to help out with the Southern New Zealand dotterel. And the more charismatic they are in the sort of the public kind of mindset, the more attractive they would be as a species to be sponsored. So there's advocacy, there's more people knowing about them would really help. But also something if some of your listeners are bird watchers in New Zealand, a good proportion of the Southern New Zealand dotterel have leg bands. So we think at least 2/3 of the population now have been banded. And that tells us who is breeding with who and for how long, and particularly as well when birds disappear from the population. But that's only as good as the number of eyes that are out there. So if people are out there bird watching in these places where they do spend their winters, so particularly on the south coast of the South Island, but as far afield as Motueka at the northern end of the South Island, if people can report those sightings or put it in an eBird checklist as a comment, then that's incredibly useful, because it tells us every little bit of information tells us a little bit more about these birds.
That's a really important point, that people can make a contribution to conservation without really doing anything special, just doing what they normally do. If you're out in New Zealand with your binoculars or looking through your spotoscope or your camera lenses, look for leg bands, not only on the dotterels, but on any birds that you see. And if you can make a note of them, do an eBird checklist. That will help. Now, Alasdair, who's doing research on the birds? Are you aware of, because I often see University of Otago putting out research on birds, but are there any projects that you know are ongoing that people could follow for the dotterel?
Yeah, so my information's only current up to sort of April this year, but I wasn't aware of any ongoing research specifically on these dotterels that was happening. The most recent research I think that I know of is back in 2016, which was the taxonomic study of the genetics of these populations and the divergence between the southern New Zealand dotterel and northern New Zealand dotterel. Getting researchers involved, it was an active part of what we were doing. We were trying to recruit people. But there are plans potentially in the future for internal Department of Conservation research. So putting radio tags or GPS transmitters on some of the birds and finding out if they're not at the wintering grounds or if they are at the wintering grounds, and then they're not seen during the breeding season by us by dotterel rangers, then whereabouts are they hanging out? Are they wandering around the South Island? Are they going cryptically from beach to beach around the South Island? Or are they nesting in parts of the island, Stewart Island, that is, that aren't visited that often? Or are they attempting to breed in the South Island, but getting cleaned out by stoats? There's all sorts of possibilities. We think that the whole breeding population is on Stewart Island, but because of where they breed, it's very hard to track them down, and their nests are quite hard to find. So the way that you find their nests is actually you have to pass within about 5 or 10 meters of them, and the bird then will start doing its broken wing display, and that tells you there's a nest nearby. But even then, quite often you won't, even knowing there's a nest within a few meters of you, you can't see it. It's so well camouflaged. And they're perfectly adapted for that. So their predators, their natural predators, are all aerial predators. So they're absolutely perfectly camouflaged from on top. When they're on the nest, there's just a patch of grass there. You'll see in the photo that they've got feathers on their backs and the upper side of their wings that are very similar to their natural environment. And once they've sat on a nest and tucked their head away, so their bill and their eye, they'll just have one eye poking out to keep an eye on what's happening around them. Once they sit still like that, they're basically invisible.
Yeah, gee, the more I think about it, this is the bird that needs to get the attention now. Kakapo has had so much and the Kakapo team have done an amazing job. But for all the positives, they suck all the oxygen out of the room in a way. That you've got the fairy turn, as you said, the New Zealand population, there's fewer of them. And then the New Zealand dotterel, far more than most of the other New Zealand species that get the headlines. Probably because there's no opportunities for ministers to easily be photographed with them and things like that. So that makes it really hard. How can somebody who really wants to help, Alasdair, how can somebody who is not already in the scientific community, in the ornithological or in the established conservation network, how can somebody make a difference?
So really, in terms of people, say, in Australia or the rest of the world?
Let's look at it two ways. If somebody is hearing this and they're in New Zealand and they think they have some skills that they may apply in any area that may help someone like you or the dedicated recovery team, what could they do? What could a New Zealander do, or somebody visiting New Zealand?
So if you want to go and see them, take photos of them, see their leg bands, the best places to see them are at Mason Bay on Stewart Island during the winter and at the Aotearoa estuary near Invercargill over the winter as well. Counts, photos, leg bands in those locations are really important, and getting photos of these birds is really super awesome because people can then see them, see their those photos can be distributed. People can write about them. or podcast about them like you are, which is awesome, because then that just gets the word out about them beyond the local population here on Stewart Island or on the south coast of New Zealand. And there are other things, advocacy kind of things like New Zealand Bird of the Year. That's not going to save the species on its own, but it helps because that's something that gets national coverage. If they're journalists, then write about these birds, tell people about them, and hopefully, if that attention ultimately you would hope would go towards a bit more sort of resource, whether that's corporate sponsorship and the likes of sort of Meridian and Genesis are doing for the Kakapo and the blue duck. But yeah, primarily sort of getting the word out, telling people about these birds and making sure that they are getting attention is probably important. Another thing to do really for long term, I guess in the medium term, would be to look up predator-free Rakiura. That's the sort of goal for these birds, really, to make their population sustainable. Support predator-free Rakiura. Tell people about that. It's probably the most ambitious pest eradication that I've heard of currently being looked at, and it's a real stepping stone towards a predator-free New Zealand.
We'll make it easy for people to chase them down because you're going to give me the links and a contact and whatnot.
Definitely.
And I'll push it. And we need to devise a hashtag for I'm being absolutely serious because
definitely.
Because if we tweet and we attach photos and we talk about it and we continue to do this for if you get the momentum up, I'm guessing to make a difference in New Zealand, the numbers that you need to be actively tweeting and promoting is a lot smaller than it needs to be in Australia, and certainly a lot smaller than it needs to be in the UK or in Canada or the US. Now, I'm making a commitment, Alasdair, with the Commonwealth Games on. I've been going to do a series of the threatened birds in Commonwealth countries and draw some attention to that. And guess which bird I'm going to be talking about for New Zealand? It was going to be a different bird, but it is now going to be the Southern New Zealand Dotterel, which
I appreciate that.
Which we need to make. We need to come up with a more unique name. I don't know what it could be, but if
Southern Dotterel is catchy.
Yeah, Southern Dotterel. Let's go with that. Let's make that the new common name, and we'll go with that. Alasdair, I'm counting on you to get me a picture straight away so that I can release this today, and then we've got the whole Commonwealth Games to bang on about it, and that's what we're going to do. The other question I have specifically, or there's two, because we talked about the pressures and the predators and whatnot, but when the birds are moving from the beaches and their roosting sites, so their feeding ground, their roosting sites, and then the movement up into above the scrub line it's a subalpine environment, isn't it? Up there. In these different locations, are they essentially on private land or are they essentially nearly always on public land?
Yeah, they're fortunate in that their breeding areas are, I think, completely within a national park. So they're on land which has the highest protection afforded. When they're flocking, the only ones that leave Rakiura National Park really are the ones that fly across the strait to Africa, which is still an area which has protection, but isn't public conservation land. So it's not owned by the New Zealand government. And they're quite close to New Zealand's biggest aluminium smelter, which is the TY Point smelter when they're over there. So when you're out there counting Dotterel off in Aotearoa, in the distance you can see the chimneys from the aluminium smelter. So they're not. So those would be the birds that would probably be in the most sort of disturbed environment.
They seem like when they are in their summer environment, in their winter environment, they're feeding down in the lowlands at sea level, that they don't mind a little bit of disturbance. Like they're not shy. So that encroachment of human activity is probably not a massive disturbing factor that changes their behaviour. So they
don't appear to feel threatened when they're moving around. It's really when they're on the nest, they're quite sensitive to disturbance. But that's good because their nesting areas are quite remote. It's just the main thing is the predators. And if we can get on top of those, and predator-free Rakiura might help with that, then the outlook for their future looks a lot brighter.
Yeah. As bright as it can possibly be from the dire situation of 12 males. Boy, oh boy. Predator-free Rakiura, is private, a foundation, or is it a semi-government body? How's it organised?
It's semi-private, so it's funded from a number of different sources, but it's basically a trust with paid staff.
Are they accepting donations? That was really the point of asking, so that if people around the world, all those shorebird enthusiasts, if Wader Quest, Wader Tales, if they were to be interested, maybe I'll have to put a bird nerd trivia game together where we can raise some money. Are they accepting donations?
Absolutely. If they're not currently, then they soon will be as they get up and running. So yeah, they're definitely, that would be a great help to the Dotterel really in the long term.
Excuse me, the lurgies got me. Okay, we'll head for that. Alasdair, what's next for you? You're not on the recovery team working for DOC anymore. What are your main focuses nowadays?
So currently I manage a team of staff who are involved in pest control and weed control around Oban. So we're funded with a government grant from a project funding grant called Jobs for Nature. So we've got that. I've been a trustee of a local community conservation group called the Stewart Island Rakiura Community and Environment Trust. So I've been a trustee of this local group since 2016, and we've had this funding provided to employ the 17 staff. So I'm currently working to run that project, and then beyond the end of that, I don't have any plans. That's towards the end of next year. I'll be obviously keenly watching what happens with the Dotterel, and I wish the new team all the best of luck, because it's awesome to see that they're now got full-time roles, and I'll be really fascinated to see the kind of things now that they can do with that. But yeah, over the next few years, I'll be here on Stewart Island. I'll be probably working in conservation in some form or another, and that might mean the Dotterel team again at some point.
Alice, you mentioned you've got a team of 17 now?
Yeah, there's 17 of us, including myself.
That's a significant proportion of the population of Stewart Island, isn't it?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's basically funding that the government has provided as part of the sort of recovery from the pandemic, has funded projects all up and down the country to create jobs in conservation. And so we're targeting a particular weed called Darwin's barberry, which is a threat to our forest ecosystems here, and also rats and possums on private land near the township. So that's land that DOC doesn't usually do predator control on. They're more focused on the larger national park. So we're doing that around the township, hopefully protecting a few of the less threatened but less critically endangered but still threatened birds around the township.
Cool. What are the other threatened birds that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so we're very lucky here on Stewart Island because we don't have stoats, that we do have some species that aren't found on the adjacent South Island. So there's what I think is probably one of the only places in the country where you'll see like kiwi birds in your garden.
Now, which one of the kiwi?
There's the southern brown kiwi, or what's called the tokueka. Tokueka in Te Reo in Maori means weka with a walking stick, with a toko. Yeah. Yeah. So weka is a small brown flightless bird, and so the walking stick is just its long bill. So basically weka with a stick.
Yeah, that's a great name.
Yeah, so southern tokueka, fantastic. There's not a night really where I live here where we can't hear them calling, and you'll often see them on the front lawn where I live. And we're incredibly fortunate to have that, and we'd like to preserve it. Likewise, one of New Zealand's large parrots, the kaka. Yep. We have a population of South Island kaka here, and on the mainland, they're threatened by stoats that will climb up trees and into their nest holes and create a bias in the opposite direction, because the females, the opposite direction to dotterels, because the females mainly do the incubation, so they're mainly the ones that get.
The ones getting. Yeah.
So there's kaka, kiwi, real dense populations around the township of tui and bellbird. So those are honey eaters. Yep. They're nectar feeders, and they are threatened when possums eat the kind of trees and nectar producing trees that they thrive on. And then we have birds like riki, which are our sort of budgerigars.
Parakeets.
Now,
which one have you got more than one on Stewart Island? So
here it's the red-fronted parakeet, which is quite unusual because in the rest of New Zealand, they're really only found on offshore islands where there are no predators. So to have such a viable population of them here suggests that perhaps they're also threatened by stoats in the rest of New Zealand. In beech forest in South Island, you'll typically find yellow-fronted parakeets. So yeah, that's always been interesting to me. It might be a habitat thing as well, because we've got intact coastal forest here, which has been cleared in most of the rest of New Zealand. And maybe that's the forest they specialise in, and in yellow-fronted parakeets specialise in beech forest. So yeah, we've got the parakeets and keruru, the wood pigeons, so New Zealand pigeons. They're very common around the town as well. And again, the rats and possums will eat their eggs, so suppressing rat and possum populations will help them.
You just think at how much could have been avoided if this stuff never got into your country. And we're not helping from the Australian side with the possums and with birds like rainbow lorikeets continually trying to established. I suppose this is a good time to remind people that if you have cage birds and you decide you don't want to have cage birds anymore, the last thing you should ever do is release a cage bird into the wild. Indian ringneck parrots, they establish all over the world. Our rainbow lorikeets are notorious bully boys once they get established, and they just dominate all the other birds that need to use nesting hollows. So, gee, don't do it. Please don't do it, especially not somewhere like New Zealand. Never, ever do it. So, Alasdair, I think we better wrap up. I think we can perhaps talk again, follow the Rakiura. Am I getting that right?
You're right, yeah, absolutely right.
Stewart Island story. It's going to be a case study that so many other islands and then portions of the New Zealand mainland can probably replicate and hopefully win the war. Maybe you can show the big cousin across the ditch how to eradicate cats. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it?
Let's say feral cats. Inside cats that you like to pat are fine. Inside cats are very nice.
I love cats, yeah, inside cats. And here on the island, people do have domestic cats, but they have to be spayed and chipped. As long as they're spayed and chipped, they're not really the primary problem. The primary problem is those resident population of cats in the forest out there, and they're completely separate. They're like a wild cat now.
I don't know if you've been seeing any of the Twitter from one of the feral cat eradication groups in Australia, but that our feral cats have now evolved or developed into animals that are the size of a small dingo. So we're talking Alsatian dogs. That's how big we're talking the cats are getting. It's horrifying. And our animals and birds and your animals and birds never evolved to deal with a predator like this. So,
no.
Huge problem. Huge problem. All right, Alasdair, been great talking to you, bird nerd. Hard work doing this early on a Saturday morning, but that's what we're here to do. And remember, when you're watching the Commonwealth Games, think about what a great mascot the Southern Dotterel would be for the New Zealand teams.
Absolutely.
Let's get on board and protect them. Alasdair Burns, Rakiura, Stewart Island, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thanks for being part of the bird emergency today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks for giving some attention to an underattended species.
Let's bang on about it for the next couple of years and try and make a difference. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. This has been the Bird Emergency. Oh, hey, if you want to watch conversations, subscribe on YouTube, thebirdemergency.com/YouTube. See you later.